Pocketpair just confirmed what we all suspected, that the changes made last November were indeed motivated by Nintendo's lawsuit. Now, if you're out of the loop here, the update made pals spawn next to the player rather than spawning from balls. But today's story is not just the confirmation of that, it's also what happens next, because Pocketpair are now saying that this is not the end. Even more changes are coming to the game, and not because they're changes that players really want to have made. Basically, Nintendo are very much still at it, and Pocketpair have outlined how they're going to fight back. Thanks to reporting from the specialist outlet GamesFray, we now have some idea of how Pocketpair plan to defend itself. Now, this comes from filings in February reviewed by GamesFray at the Tokyo District Court. Basically, the plan is to prove that Nintendo should have never been granted their patents in the first place, and this comes down to a pretty simple concept. So Nintendo filed patents in December 2021 that have been iterated on after Palworld released. Now, those most recent patent updates were filed after Palworld came out, but they were extended from previously filed patents. Now, under patent law, that's allowed, where the principle is that the natural evolution of the patent under, continued development should also be protected. But there's a natural counter to this, and that natural counter is called prior art. And prior art is what Pocketpair intend to use. So the idea is that prior art existed before the original 2021 filing date, where the combination of two separate mechanics could reasonably give rise to the patent Nintendo holds. So as an example, everyone's pointed to the idea that Pocketpair's previous game Craftopia also had a ball capture mechanic. Now, Pocketpair is not arguing that Craftopia alone means that Nintendo never should have been granted that patent, but by acknowledging Craftopia plus the influence of other existing games, the patented mechanic could be arrived at naturally through regular development processes, as opposed to, say, nabbing it from Nintendo and infringing upon their patent. Basically, as GamesFray puts it, when you add any of the following to Craftopia, you get to the same place that Palworld did, and that they're accused of infringing Nintendo's design with. So let's just make that feel real by bringing in some actual other video games, right? So games like Rune Factory 5, Titanfall 2, and Pikmin 3 Deluxe all feature a character releasing monsters/capture items in a direction by releasing a button. Yes, your Titan in Titanfall, I suppose, is a Pokemon. Jokes aside, you get the point though. Pikmin, Far Cry, and Tomb Raider all highlight that you have a variety of throwable objects as part of their mechanics. Meanwhile then, you've got Pocket Souls, the mod for Dark Souls, Octopath Traveler, and Final Fantasy all showing that you can pick targets on a field with a visual representation of how successful you might be. Okay, so those are broad examples, they're varied examples. I guess there's also the example of the Pokemon GTA mod, but basically, it's no coincidence that Nintendo games find themselves present in these lists. Pocketpair are basically banking on the validity of Nintendo's patents being granted as their main argument here, right? That they shouldn't have been granted, that is, that they're not valid. And the more that they can muddy the water around whether Nintendo should have them, the better the chance that the whole case gets thrown out. But there's a question to be asked of this situation. The Japanese lawsuit is ongoing, and these changes won't necessarily stop that right now. So why make them, right? Why would Pocketpair do all of this whenever it might seem they're making some progress? Well, that's because they might not influence Japan, but they might have an impact on the potential American lawsuit. A fun situation's going down in the US, many of them in fact, but let's just stay in the patents for now. So generally, whenever someone loses 22 out of 23 arguments, that's not really seen as victory, right? You'd think that, but it's not necessarily the case in patent law, and I've got some good news here. GamesFray's explain it to me like I'm 5 series. That means that the rest of us can actually understand what's going on. And yes, thanks to them, because this stuff can be so goddamn dense. So, per their explainer, Nintendo have been making more moves in the US with applications to the US Patent and Trademark Office. Now, these take a while to resolve, so today's set of updates will range from starting back in 2022 through to February of 2025. And to simplify things, GamesFray explained that Nintendo have been recently granted several patents by the office. Patent 1 relates to capturing a character in a field environment, so like any recent Pokemon game. Patent 2 is about players exchanging items, and Patent 3 is about using an aimed item to capture a fighting character. Rather obviously, all 3 of these could be applied to Palworld, with the latter 2 filed in 2022, while the first was filed in May 2024 after Palworld's release. Now, these are all matters of record, but they strengthen any case that Nintendo wants to make in the US about Palworld. And as for the losses, well, those losses are actually new. So 22 of the 23 losses came in the form of another application for a patent, this time a patent about writing objects in-game. Game Freak reported this as having been served a final rejection where, as part of the claims regarding the patent, Nintendo had 22 of their 23 claims be rejected. But it turns out you only really need one for it to be a problem. Now, that last claim only needed to be reworked for the patent to be granted. So Nintendo is very much not defeated in America, even though 22 of their claims for this patent, weren't accepted. And there's actually a lot Nintendo can do. They can appeal the decision, they can rework the claims in line with feedback, or they could even try to convince the patent examiner that some of the 22 rejected claims are valid. And that all seems like a lot of work just to try to toss one more patent on top of the pile that they're accumulating in the US. But it's Nintendo. They're mercs legally. And it's actually wider than just them. And that's not just my opinion. It's directly from the mouths of people who actually make the patent decisions, because they are huge business. In January of this year, we got to see things from the perspective of the people who actually file these lawsuits. Automaton reported on the, quote, importance of intellectual property rights in the games industry at Tokyo Esports Fiesta 2025. This was attended by Capcom, Nintendo, Sega, Konami, and Koei Tecmo. So Sega and Konami's representatives framed these mechanical patents in a way that was very explicit, that it's about incentivizing developers to make new systems and then protecting those systems from being stolen and recouping the high costs of developing games by licensing. And the latter part in particular was the real value of all of this work, rather than potentially risky or expensive lawsuits. But patents are also a significantly more useful tool to have than just copyright alone. Capcom's representative echoed Nintendo's with the idea that they can protect their brands, right, from infringement or damage via patents, and it's basically another tool in their arsenal, especially when brands are capable of skirting full copyright, but say can capture the spirit of a game. So for them, it's not necessarily, at least they frame it, about stamping out competition or punishing smaller teams for trying to innovate by iterating on other games. It's more about protecting what they have from other companies, big or small, not necessarily great. And that's why Nintendo, for an example, files patents for every mechanic in their games, regardless of the likelihood of them being granted. And it's that leaves the companies that breach those patents in hot water. Yes, in a way that can feel very direct and targeted, like what we've been talking about here, but also just in a systemic level, right? In that this is kind of how the system ends up working. They just make a point of filing patents for everything, right? Because they have then maximum coverage. That means, well, they can use those to further whatever ends they may have. And it's for that reason that, within Palworld, we're seeing all the fun business around gliding, in addition to the fact that the pals now spawn beside you instead of out of a ball. But okay, now that we've explored a lot of the situation, let's bring it all together. First off, this is not going to be resolved quickly. That's just not how this stuff goes, and especially if these lawsuits expand to the US or further afield. Pocketpair is clearly planning to take Nintendo on to the best of their ability here, despite Nintendo's legendary legal track record. I mean legendary. All of their lawyers are John Wick type people. So if they can win, it will be a brilliant David and Goliath story. But with companies like Capcom and Sega very happy to explain that these patents are part and parcel of game development now, it's not necessarily going to be an earth-shattering change either. It's not going to be a case where Pocketpair could win and then standards and all sorts of things in the industry would change. No, not really. The system's too big, there's too much money in it, and realistically speaking, like so many things, it inherently does favor the incumbents, because guess what? They actually have got the resources to do all of these patent filings, right? They actually have the resources to do those things. That means that, say, if everyone was to have an equal quantity of patentable innovation, who are the people who would be most able to act on that opportunity by using their resources? Is it the small little indie team, or is it the company with a humongous legal department? It's obviously the latter, and that's how it inherently plays in the favor of the incumbents. That's why the likes of your Capcoms, your Segas, etc. are all happy to talk about how this is an important part of modern game development. Big happy smiles. I suppose we'll just have to see what happens to PALs next. But anyway, as fun as all this is, if you want to get the lowdown on a very spicy new business model of, hey, just licensed branded expansions, Watch this video next.